Hello, and thanks for joining me. This video is the first part of a review and response to a Christian apologetics book entitled God Is by Almando L. Calvo, distributed by Lulu. This book aims to present a comprehensive and compelling case for the existence of the Christian God. Calvo is best known to viewers of my channel as YouTuber Christrighteous, an apologist of some infamy. Part of this infamy is due to the copious amounts of plagiarism he has committed in his videos, and part of it is due to his treatment of atheists as people. However, since I'm concerned primarily with this book rather than his YouTube activities, I'll be referring to him as Calvo. The inside cover of the book credits the book to both Calvo and one Levi Hernandez. It does not appear, however, that Hernandez had anything to do with the content or publication of this book. He is a filmmaker and cinematographer with whom Calvo has partnered to make videos for his Christrighteous channel. The outside cover, page headers, and promotional material all refer to Calvo as the sole author of the book. Therefore, unless I am informed that Hernandez did indeed co-write the content of the book, I will treat Calvo as the sole author. This series is not intended for Calvo's benefit. Calvo blocked me on his YouTube channel a long time ago for daring to suggest that Frank Turek had been debunked. I know of no way to reach him privately, and as far as I'm aware, he has not seen a single one of my videos and never will. Calvo has deliberately made himself unreachable by me, and so I am treating him as unreachable. Rather, this series is intended for atheists who want a thorough look at what amateur apologists find compelling, amateur apologists who want to know what's wrong with the arguments they find compelling, and anyone who wants to know more about this particular apologist and the nature and character of his work. A few preliminary issues before I turn to the book. First of all, why am I bothering? Why am I spending so much time and effort on a self-published book by an amateur apologist who, spoiler alert, has nothing new to offer? This is a reasonable question, and there are two answers. First, because he got my attention. Among the many anti-atheist videos published on Calvo's channel are a pair of videos called If Atheists Were Honest, which, as the name suggests, asserts that atheists are dishonest. In these videos, he pretends to be Richard Dawkins or some other English atheist, and in that character he states that atheists do know that God exists, that we do find the arguments for God compelling, and that we won't admit this because of various negative character traits.
To be honest, the arguments seem pretty aligned with reality, and that kind of scares me, because I don't want moral accountability. I don't want a higher being than myself. In fact, I would much rather be a god of my own life.
This probably goes without saying, but just for the record, Calvo's actual accent is nothing like this. As of this recording, the two videos have been made private following an extended response by YouTuber Logic, who, by the way, has now made something like 5 full-length videos on Calvo. But Calvo has not apologized for the All Atheists Are Liars videos, and if anything, he has doubled down on the sentiments expressed therein. It may be suggested that Calvo should be excused for this behavior, or if not excused, then at least treated gingerly, on account of his youth and naivete. But I disagree. Calvo is approximately in his mid-20s. He is old enough to participate in every age-restricted activity in the United States except for those reserved for senior citizens. He is a self-described author, filmmaker, and musician. He is also, according to a recent video, an expectant father. This may be the least of the relevant factors, but it means he is mature enough to either voluntarily take responsibility for a child or to be coerced by the state into taking responsibility. By any reasonable standard, I argue that Calvo has reached and passed the age at which he should be held accountable for his words. There's another reason why I chose to focus my effort on this book. It is a synthesis, or really more like a compilation, of arguments and ideas from a great many sources, ranging from professional apologists like Craig and Turek to some random idea that some random Christian posted on some random website. These are all ideas that some Christians, probably a great many Christians, have found compelling at one time or another. They are ideas that they have chosen to share. So there is great utility in choosing a book like this and taking a comprehensive look at it. I have chosen Calvo's book because, as I said, he got my attention. A few words about copyright. Although every published and unpublished work in the United States is considered in theory to be copyrighted by its owner, in Calvo's case it would be difficult to enforce this copyright for at least 2 reasons. First, there is no copyright notice in the book. There is no statement that any rights are reserved. Copyright notices have not been required since 1989, but they are still standard practice for any author or publisher who wishes to protect their intellectual property. And second, Calvo's book itself commits theft of intellectual property. Many, if not most of his ideas are taken from other sources without proper accreditation. This does not just apply to ideas. There are many images peppered throughout the book, which he appears to have simply taken from the internet and pasted them in, without accreditation, without sourcing, without licensing. One example of this, from page 41 of Calvo's book, is an image from the TV series Futurama, which I will not display here because the intellectual property of Futurama is currently owned by Disney, and they are somewhat famous for their litigiousness. But Calvo is either unaware of this fact, or simply believes that God will protect him from worldly consequences. Which wouldn't be much, frankly, except that the infringing property appears in material that Calvo is selling commercially, and that makes a huge difference. In any case, the fair use doctrine states that limited use of a copyrighted work for criticism purposes, without the copyright holder's permission, is permissible. I will do my best to limit my use of Calvo's work accordingly, out of respect for the fair use doctrine, as well as those portions of the book which Calvo can legitimately claim as his own intellectual property. Out of an abundance of caution, with a few exceptions, I will not share images from the book, but only quotations. These quotations will be depicted exactly as they appear in the book, with spelling, grammar, and punctuation errors left intact. Now at last, let's turn to the book itself. The book is softcover, and it's 8.5 by 11 inches, which print-on-demand companies like Lulu will tell you is the size of a textbook, but it's actually the size of a standard sheet of printer paper. The paper is exactly that. Good quality, standard size printer paper. Same as I have in my office. Hell, give me some printer's glue and some glossy stock for the cover, and I can publish Calvo's next book. Speaking of the cover, it depicts a pair of hands, which frankly look like teenagers' hands, holding a red giant star against the backdrop of a galaxy. No cover artist is credited. In fact, not one single image in the book is credited to an artist or source. Turning the page, we see that there are 12 chapters listed in the table of context. Yes, you heard me correctly, table of context. That's what he calls his table of contents. We're not off to a very good start, are we? So let's turn to chapter 1 of the book. The chapter is entitled The Creator, and it starts off by introducing the Kalam cosmological argument, which he simply calls the cosmological argument. Anything that begins to exist has a cause, the universe began to exist, therefore the universe has a cause. Now, I know atheists are tired of this argument, he writes, but before you stone me, let's take a deep look into this line of reason. By the way, all excerpts I read from this book will be read exactly the way Calvo wrote them. He speaks of atheists stoning him, which, even if he is being metaphorical, says something about his persecution complex. Indeed, Calvo seems to relish in his persecution complex. In addition to being a writer, he is a musician, and he has a forthcoming album of Christian music entitled They Will Hate Us. My guess is that he will see this entire video series as a validation of that very persecution complex. I can't possibly be responding to this book in order to refute a significant sampling of arguments used by Christians. No, it must be to persecute him. Calvo states that since time, space, and matter had a beginning, they did not exist before the universe. This is the logic that underlies much of what he says in this chapter, and here's why it fails. If you are standing at the North Pole, the only direction you can walk is south. Similarly, if you are standing at the very beginning of time, the only temporal direction you can proceed from there is forward. The phrase before time simply doesn't refer to anything. So it does not follow from the fact that time, space, and matter had a beginning that there was a state of nothing before time, space, and matter. The concept of before simply doesn't apply in this case. And so it doesn't follow that these things require a creator. Calvo throws in a quote by Albert Einstein, who says that according to relativity, time, space, and gravitation have no separate existence from matter. This doesn't support any of the arguments he's making, and in fact, it would seem to support materialism. Because if time and space and the laws of nature have no separate existence from matter, this suggests that matter, and therefore energy, are more fundamental to the universe than time, space, and the laws of nature. Surely this is not what Calvo was attempting to communicate. Indeed, I don't think he was attempting to communicate anything here. He just saw a quote that looked good and decided to include it. Calvo states, if there was absolutely nothing, no single thing, not anything at all, then how could a law be present in the state of nothingness? But nobody except Christians are insisting that there has to have been a state of nothingness prior to the universe. By the way, some apologists will try to draw a distinction between temporally prior and causally prior, but this distinction has no difference that is relevant to the argument. All active causation takes time. Simultaneous active causation is incoherent. Different continuums of time can be imagined which are orthogonal to each other, but time is still involved. This, by the way, is why it makes no sense to speak of a being outside time or who is timeless. So again, it makes no sense to speak of something being before time. Calvo asks how nothingness could exist without a law of causation existing in it. The answer is, it would have to, because it would then otherwise not be pure nothingness. Christians like to imagine a state of limited nothingness, in which nothing exists except for those things like the law of causation which are necessary to prevent something arising in the nothingness so as to require the existence of a God. But why should such a selective state of nothingness be the most fundamental state of reality? Nothing means nothing. Absolute nothing means absolute nothing. And if there was a state of absolute nothingness, there could not be any kind of being, let alone a God, outside of it, because the state of nothingness would not be absolute. If you have a nothing, and you have a something that stands in relation to that something, such as being outside of it, then it is not an absolute nothingness, but again, a limited nothingness. There is no reason to think that putting something inside a limited nothingness requires an all-powerful deity, any more than filling a vacuum chamber with air requires an all-powerful deity. There's no reason to think that filling a limited nothingness requires a personal being, because impersonal forces fill vacuums all the time. Granted, I am talking about a spatial vacuum here, but if you want to argue that this principle does not carry over into the metaphysics of a limited philosophical nothing, then you need to argue for that. I don't see how that can be done because, again, I don't think the idea of a limited philosophical nothing is coherent. But if it is possible for a pure philosophical nothing to exist, and if that is the most fundamental state of reality, then there are models of causation under which it is possible for something to come from nothing. We'll talk about that later in the video. Most Christians who employ the Kalam cosmological argument know better than to try to squeeze all the attributes of God, such as being moral and being personal, into the conclusion of the argument like it's a clown car. A few unsophisticated apologists have tried it, however, and Calvo clearly has been reading them. There's simply no way to get from the universe has a cause alone to the cause must be a moral agent. Additional argumentation is needed beyond the two premises of the Kalam cosmological argument. Having argued, or rather asserted, that the creator must be timeless, spaceless, immaterial, moral, personal, intelligent, powerful, and alive. I don't know why he put that in all caps. Calvo states that the only being capable of these attributes is God because he is the first thing that comes to anyone's mind, even the atheist. But why should the attributes of the creator of the universe be bound by the popular cultural ideas of one species on one planet, in one galaxy, in one dusty corner of the universe? Usually at this point it would be appropriate to employ the various arguments that indirectly refute the Kalam cosmological argument, which I've used in previous videos, such as the temporal cosmological argument. Everything that has a cause has a temporal cause, the universe does not have a temporal cause, therefore the universe does not have a cause. The thing is, these arguments are usually employed to refute the line of reasoning that is often used to defend the first premise of the Kalam, that whatever begins to exist has a cause. And the weird thing is, Calvo has so far made absolutely no attempt to defend this premise. Not even, surely it's obvious to everyone that everything that begins to exist has a cause. In fact, he hasn't defended either premise of the Kalam so far. He has just assumed that the two premises have been established, and so is trying to establish what the cause of the universe must be like, that he must be timeless, spaceless, and so on. Although there are some very basic attempts at defending the two premises later, they're not clearly labeled as an attempt to defend the premises, but rather just ideas that he's throwing out there. There is no organization whatsoever in his defense of the cosmological argument. It's as though he reads a paragraph from a book or a website, thinks it sounds good to him, rewrites it in his own words, or not, this step is optional to him, and puts it next in line in the manuscript of his book. I'm guessing this is exactly what happened. So as we go, I'm going to try to tie the argument he's making on the immediate page back to dangling lines of thought he left in earlier pages, so as to steel man these arguments as much as possible. Next, Calvo talks about science. He states briefly the steps of the scientific method, making a mistake on the last step, stating that a final conclusion is called for after an experiment. This is a fundamental misunderstanding of science. There are no final conclusions. All conclusions in science are tentative. He then states, while many people may believe that science proves everything, science by itself cannot actually prove anything, including things like evolution and the age of the universe. Proofs are only possible through logic, reason, and mathematics, which are only used by human minds. Inasmuch as he is stating that the idea of proof only applies to logical and mathematical constructs, this is true. The word proof is used loosely and casually in science, if at all. This is why I say his representing of the last step of the process as a final conclusion represents a fundamental misunderstanding of science. Most likely, whatever source he looked up only told him that a conclusion was to be reached at this point, and he added the word final in order to pad his word count and/or sound intelligent. To say that something has been proven in the scientific sense is not to say that it has been proven in the logical or mathematical sense, but rather to say that the available evidence has supported the theory to such a large extent that anyone who denies the truth of it probably has no idea what the hell they're talking about. Both evolution and the old age of the universe have been established to that degree of confidence, and we therefore say in casual conversation that they have been scientifically proven. Calvo then attacks the idea of falsifiability, saying it seems a little odd because taking the stance that something has to be falsifiable to be considered evidence is an argument itself and not falsifiable. This is a fundamental misunderstanding of the criterion of falsifiability. It is intended not to apply to all statements and arguments and evidence, but rather to distinguish science from pseudoscience. The proposition that all life on Earth evolved from a single common ancestor over a long period of time can be falsified by, for instance, finding rabbit fossils in the Precambrian strata. The proposition that the Earth and everything on it was specially created 6,000 years ago, and subsequent events transpired in such a way to make everything appear as though they are billions of years old, is not falsifiable. Thus, evolution is a science, and creationism is a pseudoscience. Calvo also attacks the illegitimacy of using personal experience as evidence because, and I am going to include a picture here because otherwise you're going to think I made this up, repeatable scientific tests and peer reviews also count as personal experience. Man, the only way I can even think of to try to steelman this is to say that we have knowledge of our own experiments and their results and the comments left from peer review judges only through personal experience with them, and so there is no reason not to accept personal experience of, say, goblins and leprechauns as valid. In other words, you can't really know for sure that anything is true, so you have no reason not to accept that my thing is true. Obviously, this is nonsense. Calvo is trying to invoke the specter of solipsism to give legitimacy to an otherwise illegitimate proposition. I don't need to accept that you are really seeing goblins and leprechauns in order to accept that I am really seeing this copy of, say, the New England Journal of Medicine. If there was total consistency in the reports of those who experienced goblins and leprechauns, while no two people could agree on the contents of a given issue of the New England Journal of Medicine, then Calvo might have a point. But in fact, it's the exact opposite. This is another way by which we may distinguish between science and pseudoscience. Now let me ask you something. Why is Calvo attacking science in the first place? I mean, we know the answer to that. It's because he read a creationist thing that sounded good to his creationist sensibilities and decided to throw it in there without thinking of how it tied into everything else he was doing. But rhetorically, why is he attacking science? Because that's what he is doing when he attacks scientific proof, falsifiability, and the illegitimacy of personal experience as evidence. All people who actually conduct science, and I mean for real, not for pretend, employ all three of those concepts to varying degrees when doing so. So by attacking them, he is attacking science. And yet, in the next few sections of the chapter, he attempts to use science to show that the universe had a beginning. So at this point, I think we all need a break for our irony meters to recharge. Next week, we will cover the second part of the first chapter, and after that, I will give the series a rest for a little while, because, well, I don't want this to turn into the Christrighteous channel. Also, there is simply so much unfiltered bad here that I'm just gonna need a break between installments. But as of now, I do indeed intend to address the entire book, chapter by chapter, paragraph by paragraph. Calvo has a habit of pulling down those YouTube videos of his that receive significant attention by atheists, but he cannot pull down this book. Even if he removes it from distribution, he cannot take the physical copy I have purchased out of my hands. What's done is done. If you enjoyed this video and want to help my channel grow, please hit the like, share, and subscribe buttons. Be sure to hit the bell to be notified when a new video hits. And if you want to share your thoughts about Almando Calvo, aka Christrighteous, leave a comment below. Thanks as always for joining me. We'll see you in the next video. I'm David John Wellman, and the rest is up to you.